Brilliant. Thank you. So welcome everyone to our post-AGM fireside chat with Mike Palmer. Mike is one of Three Dads Walking, a campaign to raise awareness of suicide and papyrus prevention of young suicide, the charity that supports young people and their families with the prevention of and the devastating effects of suicide. Three Dads Walking has raised over £1 million for Papyrus, which has meant that the charity now has a 24/7 helpline, plus more offices across the UK, helping it to continue the plight of the prevention of suicide, as well as supporting friends and families to support their loved ones before it's too late. This evening, we have the pleasure of speaking to Mike about being galvanised alongside Andy and Tim, the two other dads, to set up their Three Dads Walking campaign, whilst also being thrust into the world of public affairs and sharing with us what 2025 has in store for their campaigning. So over to you, Mike. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that's going to help to sort of direct our conversation, and then hopefully we'll have some moments later on for any questions from our colleagues in the room.
Yeah.
So first of all, I thought it'd be a lovely way to just introduce and tell us a little bit about your daughter, Beth. And I also wanted to mention, did she get her creative flair from you?
She most certainly didn't. No. Beth was a wonderful daughter. She's always that little girl who used to ride on my shoulders, hold my hand, and she can get away with absolutely anything by, basic saying, "Dad, I love you." But we lost Beth when she was 17, and she was blossoming into quite an incredible young woman. I mean, I would say that she's my daughter, but she was training to become a vocal artist, and really she had the world at her feet. She belonged on stage. She had an absolutely amazing voice, and she certainly didn't get that from me, honestly. I don't. But she had the ability as well just to pick up a guitar and play it. I used to take her around to her gigs. She was starting to gig at local pubs and local clubs and things like that. And, she just rocked up there with her little guitar, with her, her amp, and, and off she went, absolutely no fear, and people loved her. But the thing is with Beth as well, as well as being a beautiful daughter, she was also a sister, cousin, a niece. She was a granddaughter still. Her nana and granddad are still alive, and the hole she left is, we'll never fill it. I'm here now. I'm talking, and I've talked to you before, Sally, about the effects of losing a child to suicide. In Beth's case, we never saw it coming. And this is the most frightening thing. Hindsight gives me the ability to look back and pick up signs and things she said, and if I had more of an awareness about suicide, and indeed if Beth knew how to reach out, there is a chance she'd still be here today. I miss that little girl every single day. I sometimes think, wow, it's just over 4 years. It was beginning of lockdown, and lockdown, I think, had a lot to do with it as well. She saw her gigs being cancelled. She saw, her social life being cancelled, things that were so important to a 17-year-old girl. But as we know, I think it was very much an impulsive decision. But if you look at Andy and Tim's daughters as well, all the information's on our website. We tell the stories there, www.threedadswalking.uk. But Andy and Tim's daughter, Sophie's and Emily's stories were very different. But the fact is, they were all absolutely beloved daughters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, just to say to anyone, it's a lovely way of their legacy as well, in terms of having read it myself and just getting a feel for who they were as people, but also I think in terms of that connection that you have with their similarities, as much as the fact that they're women as well, incidentally, I think there's a lot of kind of commonalities that I'm sure brought you together. And I was just interested to see how you did meet with Andy and Tim, or how did you come together to make the Three Dads Walking?
It was fate.
Mm.
It was fate, but it was Surviving Children who brought us together.
Oh, right. And is that a
Um,
charity?
no,
No.
no, it was our Surviving
Oh,
Children.
generally, sorry, I thought you
Yes,
meant
yes,
another
yeah.
organization.
No, no, it was Tim's eldest daughter, Annabelle, saw a an article on Beth that had gone out either in the press or social media. I don't really know.
Mm.
But Tim lost his daughter Emily just 5 days before we lost Beth. But
Oh,
he
gosh.
lived in Manchester. He lives out in Norfolk. And I ended up talking to Annabelle because she contacted one of my daughters. And basically, I spoke to Annabelle. She said, "Do you want to speak to my dad?"
Mm.
And there's many things that have kept me still here. I ended up in an awful place losing Beth. As you would, I was
Mm.
suicidal. I tried to take my own life. I'm very open with this because people,
Mm.
it's important
Need
that
to
people
talk. Yeah.
understand. Oh yeah, the
Mm.
grief is it's an absolute living hell.
Mm.
But I ended up speaking to Tim, who's very much in the same place.
Mm.
A guy I'd never met, and we spoke from 3 weeks after
Mm.
losing our daughters, 3 or 4 weeks. There's not a week gone by that we haven't spoken, and often it's 3 or 4 times in that week.
Mm.
But as time went on as well, I started to do some stuff and courses on suicide awareness, suicide prevention, and suicide intervention, and some sort of raising some money and funds for a wonderful charity called Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicide. And there I heard of another dad called Andy Airy, who lived up in
Cumbria.
Cumbria. Yeah. And the case was I bumped into his son. So already I'd formed an idea about walking with Tim because we had to fight back.
Mm.
Even though we're in the depths of despair, something just tells you, we've got to do something about it. And the thing was, we didn't know that suicide was the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK. We didn't know that we lose 200 school age children every year. No one told us. This is the stigma, isn't it? People
Mm.
don't talk about this huge danger out there. Myself and Tim felt as though we needed to do something, so we talked about walking, and then it made sense that we bring Andy in. So I ended up going for a small walk with Andy and chatting to him about it. And since then, we've been just about inseparable.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these sort of tragic and like just so desperate situations and like you say, fate can really bring about something wonderfully positive, and kind of, I suppose it's a little bit miraculous, isn't it, under the circumstances. So, and also, of course, walking and being in nature and all of that stuff, I imagine is good for your own mental health, as we know it in general for ourselves, don't we? So it kind of feels very fitting, doesn't it, in terms of that walking element to what you're trying to achieve. So, out of the kind of campaign work, you've mentioned that you've obviously been up and down to London, meeting the governments and obviously ministers around the work and obviously the tragedies that you've both experienced, you've all experienced. What would you say surprised you the most around the campaign work that you've been doing?
It's difficult to say really because we've walked 3 times now. The second time we walked in between the UK capitals, over to Belfast, then flew over, did a short walk there, flew over to Edinburgh, then down to Cardiff, and obviously across to London. And we with us, we carried a petition on, well, it was Andy Burnham had suggested that we do it
Mm.
to get suicide prevention on the RSHE curriculum within schools. So, it's like this. So we're not telling our children about the greatest danger
Yeah.
to them. And the cat's already out the bag. They know
Mm.
about suicide. So if we don't teach them age appropriately and sensitively,
Mm.
we're letting them down. What surprised me most is um, talking to politicians. You always have a bit of an opinion about politicians when you see them on telly and whatever.
Mm.
But the politicians we met, they've been good people, no matter what party, they're in. And we believe all this should be cross-party,
Yes.
cross-department as well. It's too big for politics. We'll work with whoever's in power, but they are people who want to make a change. But also what surprised me was that a lot of them had very little knowledge about suicide, and that went from Department of Education and even Department of Health and Social Security. You know,
Right, that is
it's
interesting.
yeah, it was interesting, you know, but also surprising thing is how many people are actually affected by suicide. And
Particularly, I imagine, in public affairs and politics. I mean, we hear about a
yeah,
lot of the threats and the risks that they take on as individuals, don't they? So that is
yes,
surprising. And I suppose even as a government employer side of things, perhaps that's something that also needs to change for themselves as individuals, as much as, like you say, the kind of what the service is to their communities and residents as well, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm,
yeah. Well, we need to do far more, but I think obviously that it should start in schools. We
yes.
can't always guarantee that our kids have a brilliant home life, but you know, I always say this, you know, what's the point in academic qualifications if you haven't got a happy, resilient young person to be able
And
to
make the
use
most
them?
of those. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Mm,
suicide prevention is that's a line I believe that every child should go over, that every child should get that training. And
mm,
I've seen it taught from year six to year well to sixth form. You
yeah.
know, we Sir John Moores University, they're trialing something called MAPS, a multimodal approach to preventing suicide in schools at the moment in Liverpool or Merseyside and Cheshire area. So, you know, I've seen it taught quite a few times. And the kids, you know, if the kids can interact, they can laugh, believe it or not, you
Mm,
know, because
mm.
life, you know, you relax them into a well-taught lesson, and that we've spoken to them afterwards, I've seen them afterwards. They aren't phased by it. They
I
know
think they're
why
quite
it is.
resilient in other ways, aren't they? Or they're a little bit more accepting of information that we perhaps worry that they're too young or they're not able to take in. But you're right. I think when we do some, and I think there's a lot of debate, you know, there's a lot of discussion and some amazing stuff that can come out of secondary schools. Maybe primary is a bit different, I suppose, but you can still, like you say, talk about it because it comes down to some of those broader issues around if we're trying to hide them from it, we're not going to protect them anyway. So it seems as though there's some sense, isn't there?
That's it. That's it.
That is interesting.
There's always the fear that you mentioned suicide, it'll happen.
Hmm.
Now, the research is there that that isn't the case, and it's suicide prevention that's being taught. That's
Yeah.
the important bit. You know, sadly, it will still happen. There's no magic wand here, you know, but
Mm.
doing nothing to me is not an option. But, you know, but you need to create, you're mentioning sort of secondary schools, you know, we need to do a lot of work in primary schools as
Mhm,
well, you know,
absolutely. Yeah,
around,
and I
you know,
think there's a perception that it would be secondary though, and that's why you say it's very much around sowing that seed early, so it becomes a norm to be able to speak about it or to share
you
and to reach out.
that's it. You build the foundations in early years and primary school, you know, in resilience and well-being. You know, there's lots of work we can do, and I think academic qualifications, we need to get a balance between the two now, and I
Yeah.
don't think we are. And I think a lot of schools at the moment, they, you know, they're quite, and some people won't maybe forgive me for saying this, but they're places of stress and
Mm.
anxiety, and that shouldn't be the case. And sadly, it's the case for the teaching staff as well, and the
Yes.
teachers. They're dealing with a lot of I think, mental health issues, behavioral issues. They've still got the targets to meet, and we're losing wonderful, wonderful teachers, wonderful
Yeah.
individuals who, you know, really should be supported far
Yeah.
more. You
Yeah.
know,
And are respected as well, aren't they? Often the ones who go out of the profession are the good ones. You know, it's terrible, isn't it, in
oh
that respect?
yeah, it's all, and I know many of them. I mean, many people will ask, "How am I forming my opinions?" You know, the fact is that since I've lost Beth, I've lived in this world for, you know, over 4 years now, about 4.5 years. And I talk to people every week. You know, I spend a lot of time talking to teachers, teaching staff. They they back what we're doing,
Mhm.
you know, that they believe it is the way forward, you know, and yeah, just by talking to people, you know, I form these, our children are the most precious things in
Mm.
our lives. they are our future.
Yeah.
And I believe we need to invest in that future far more. And I believe if we do that, I believe we'll take a lot of the pressure off a lot of the services and things further down the line.
Yeah,
You
there's a
know,
lot around that, isn't there?
yeah, we can't be a society of constantly firefighting, you know, practicing damage limitation by, there'll always be time for, you know, where where you have to intervene. Of course there is down the line, but we need to do far more work getting upstream. You know, let's work on prevention. Let's try and stop the problems before they happen, you know. So
I was going to say, there's a lot around. You mentioned before as well how you obviously talk to bereaved families as well. And I was just thinking that, you know, again, we know that suicide is sadly way more prevalent than we maybe think or perhaps assume. And tonight, some of our audience may have known someone or have a loved one who's died by suicide. I wanted to understand a little bit about the kind of support that you found to help you and your family when Beth died.
it was very difficult. It was very difficult because we were right at the beginning of lockdown.
Mm.
We lost Beth and virtually were just about isolated. But I found my help in talking to Tim. One, I didn't know Andy for the first year or so. Talking to Tim, also some friends were very proactive in listening to my ranting. And the fact is that I couldn't even focus on my family. I just totally broke as a person. I was shattered, you know. So they all of a sudden didn't have dad there, you know, and they were struggling with their own grief, you know. But my doctor was also brilliant, a young doctor who I still have never seen to this day, but obviously I've spoken to her. But she had limited experience in dealing with someone like me, who was obviously suicidal. But she made such an effort to learn, to talk to me, and pick up on things like support services, as in the Greater Manchester Suicide Bereavement Information Service was in existence then. It is now the Greater Manchester Bereavement Service, but they were also brilliant as well. And in the end, I got a brilliant guy who counselled me. And probably it was too early to be counselled in the scheme of things, but he went above and beyond, and you know, did an absolutely amazing job, you know. And the chaplain at Manchester Airport, where I used to work.
All
So,
right.
yeah, and I'm not a religious person. I do have different beliefs now. I do believe there is something after this life. Sounds a bit weird, but I do believe that now, and it doesn't have to be all surrounded by religion. But I have been on Songs of Praise, amazingly,
Oh,
and
really?
I never thought that'd happen ever, ever. But yeah, but George was absolutely brilliant as well. He stood beside me. So those were the things that kept me going, and
And
my
and you're
my little dog.
Yeah, this is it. I was just going to say it just demonstrates as humans, no matter where and what walk of life you're coming from, it's the compassion, isn't it? It sounds from those individuals that came in front of you, which is wonderful. And as I think again, it comes back to that, you know, if you don't know, that doesn't matter. You can still talk, you can still listen, and just being there and helping others to get through what is actually one of the worst things you could possibly imagine.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
on
I
a
mean,
slightly given where you are now, and obviously I imagine those individuals would be so proud of you to see how you've come along and where you've kind of taken that. What's in store now for Three Dads Walking into 2025?
we're still campaigning. We're still campaigning hard. We've still not got the suicide prevention and the RSHE curriculum over the line. There
Right.
is still that fear that you talk about suicide.
And
It
it's going
will
to happen.
so we are battling that a little bit, but we've as I said to you before, we're pushing a report done by Nina Smith, School-Based
Yes.
Suicide Prevention Strategies. And basically, it shows what they do abroad and what we can bring here to support our kids. We don't want mental health to be used as an excuse. We want to build a resilience so our kids understand it to start off with. But we are very much waiting for more meetings. We did have a meeting a couple of days ago with Department of Education and Department of Health and Social Security. So we're hoping to hear back from that. But basically, we'll be writing, we'll be pushing. We're not afraid to be heard. Luckily, the Prime Minister is well aware of us and seems to, well, he invites us to some of his speeches. That's, it's good.
It's on the radar. Yeah.
We'll use everything we can to push it. Next year, we're looking at walking.
I was just going to ask you, when's your next walk? Are you going to be walking again?
Well, this will be the 4th time, but I think we're going to do it slightly different this time. We're looking for more isolated parts of the UK, believe it or not, because I live on beautiful Isle of Ynys Môn. That is Anglesey, and it's a beautiful place. But I realise that so many people have never heard of Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicide. They've never heard of Papyrus's Hopeline 247, 24-hour helpline for those under 35 who are in crisis, struggling, but also, as important, it's for concerned others.
Yes.
But I realise what happens in smaller communities now, talking to people, they know what I do here. And it's quite alarming. People don't even know what to do with the first call.
Yeah.
And even using Hopeline may save a life.
Yeah. And it is, like you say, it's raising awareness, isn't it? Which of course is very much a part of this in terms of getting people to know, but also, and hopefully be inspired, in terms of being able to galvanize themselves to share it with others and onwards as much as they kind of personally.
So we're going to bring it to Anglesey in September, but we're looking for a few other maybe islands, more isolated places to walk. Now, we always want to raise money for Papyrus. We're nearly up to 1.5 million now.
Oh, we're not right, amazing.
Yeah, well, it is incredible. But as you mentioned before, it's enabled them to open more hubs around the country. I'd love to open one here on Anglesey as well. And obviously, they've gone 24/7 on Hopeline as well. That is absolutely incredible.
That must feel very rewarding for you three as well.
It's not just us, but we know we help that to happen.
Definitely. And I think that's the key, isn't it, about this whole community kind of getting behind something and really powering numbers and things like that. So one of the things that for my final question, and just to mention, by the way, to colleagues in the room, is that Linda very kindly has put a link to the report that Mike has referenced that Nina has been doing, in case anybody would like to have a look at that. You've obviously got an audience tonight of PR and communications professionals. So I wanted to ask you about how can I work in communications support and help drive the conversation and discussion around suicide?
I think it's changing the narrative, isn't it? Sort of taking the stigma away from talking about suicide. It's out there, it's there, and it is hard, but people can't reach out if they don't feel comfortable in talking about it. Mental health issues, poor mental health, it can strike anyone at any time for many reasons. And you may have someone very close to you, a family member, a friend, who isn't talking because they feel as though they can't bring up this subject. So it's changing the narrative. We've always, and we found that with walking as well, that we were joined by people who've been, sometimes they've been bereaved decades ago and never really talked about, their loss. But sometimes it was literally weeks that people have been bereaved by. But the power of talking is incredible. And when we hope basically that, I'll plug the book here, Sally. We have got a book out, Three Dads Walking 300 Miles of Hope, and it tells a story of our coming together in the first walk. But the point is on it, we hope it's a story of hope as well.
Yeah.
you know, because 3 bereaved dads walking, and we managed to start laughing on the walk, you know, and laughing doesn't come easy. You feel guilty, but we did, you know, and the camaraderie we felt with not just each other, but those people we met, 'cause we're still friends with a lot of those people.
Oh, that's nice. Like
It's
strangers coming up and just coming
That's
along
it.
with you, that
That's it.
connection. And
That's
then from
it.
a professional thing, you've mentioned around how, and I know that sadly there are parts of the media that still use it to this day, but it's also about some of the ways in which we reference and report suicide, isn't there?
Yes, there is. I mean, a lot of people still use the word committed. You know, it's been ingrained for years, but you know, we need to lose it. You know, as public relations as well. Don't use the word. Use died by suicide or took their own life, because it goes back to the days where suicide was illegal. But with it being illegal, it meant people couldn't talk about their thoughts, and they couldn't reach for help, because the potential was, and
Yeah.
it did happen, they'd be arrested.
It wasn't that long ago that it was removed, wasn't it? I
It
can
was,
remember it vaguely, been
it
in
was
my lifetime.
1961,
Oh, right,
1961.
okay.
Yeah.
So it's
But
still quite late.
but this is the point. It's still not, suicide still isn't talked about. I mean, who'd want to talk about it? But it's you know, because it still has the stigma, it's still carried. But also, it's a fact that no matter what religion you're in as well,
Yeah.
it can be against your God and against your religion. So you're also committing a crime there, if you like.
Yeah, in that sort of spiritual or religious sense as well, or
Yeah,
cultural
yeah. I
sense.
mean, what we believe that help should be preached from the pulpit. You know, help is here. You know, people still get a lot out of their religion and their beliefs, you know, and to feel as though someone is there that can help them, you know, that's powerful in itself.
Definitely.
But I would, if anyone's, well, if anyone's listening now, hopefully a couple of people are listening anyway.
There are, yeah.
But I would implore everyone here to take even an online course on suicide awareness or suicide prevention. Sometimes noticing the signs and being able to say the right thing, that is the difference between life and death. You know, sometimes you're on a knife edge. People can go either way. But having that awareness, and you know, I'd implore parents to especially do that.
Yeah.
But remember, I never saw Beth ever taking her own life. It happened right under my nose.
I can imagine, like you say, and I think certainly it's food for thought, because like you say, that it's an area that we don't want to think about, which is probably why we don't have it, or there's certainly a bit of reticence at the moment with regards to pushing it out into schools and things. But I really appreciate you coming today, Mike, and obviously talking and raising awareness of this. Like I said, you are in a good captive audience of people who can help to, drive this discussion both in their own families and friends, but also perhaps in that professional capacity as well. I wanted to just open to the floor now and sort of see if anybody had any questions for Mike or would like to comment on what we've discussed this evening. If you could raise your hand, and then that way, then I can see you and we can reference you. We've got a couple of things in the chat that we've got the report that Linda's put in, and Nigel just says, thank you, Mike, and all the power to you and your partners.
Thank you. Thank you, Nigel.
Anybody have any questions they'd like? So thank you. So Kevin, would you like to go ahead?
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Kevin.
I'll just lower my hand, and then I'll do it that way. I'll do it in the physical form as well and lower it that way. I'm sure you've heard it many, many times before. That's incredibly inspiring, from such a horrible original circumstances to have achieved what you've achieved, is, as well as your two new friends, is just incredible. I wanted to ask like a practical question. I wasn't sure what background you had in PR, or any of you had in any capacity in PR. You've drummed up so much interest in your story. How did you find that? How did you find what was your experience? I don't know if it was your first exposure to, or perhaps you'd not had a huge amount of exposure to having to do so much media work, I guess, and other aspects of PR.
No, we were all absolutely new to it, but we did have the support of BBC Breakfast and Granada. So we had them on side straight away. So I think I hold the record for being on the red sofa in the morning. I honestly do. I can't even remember how many times I've been on it now, but obviously it puts us out there. Having support of the BBC has been invaluable to us, and, big praise to them as well. They want to support us, the reasons, and they've got a great team there. The reporters they send with us, Alison, and been absolutely incredible. But we also have a journalist called Mel Barham who works for Granada, but she used to know Beth. She did an article on me a few years before we lost Beth, and she's been incredible as well, doing some absolutely amazing pieces. But my PR training, no, nil.
This is it. It just shows, doesn't it? You can sometimes be thrust into the limelight and you just kind of get on with it. James, did you have a question?
I was just going to simply say thank you, and I've seen you guys on TV before, so you're clearly doing a great job of raising awareness of it. And yeah, I'm sure lots of other people have as well. So it's really
thank you,
good.
James.
Thanks for that.
We have Amanda who's with us as well, and she says, "Thank you for sharing, Mike, for all the work you do. Like many, suicide has touched my life. Are you expecting this to become more critical work as the impact of COVID lockdowns continues to affect young people long term?"
It's certainly a factor, isn't it? I think there's many factors out there. I think our young people aren't as resilient as they used to be, but I think there's pressures coming in at different angles. Certainly lockdown was one. Social media and the mobile phone.
A good and a bad, isn't it? Yeah.
I'm afraid it is. When our young people are affected 24/7 or can be by their mobile phone, they feel so entitled to have it, and it really is. I hear too many stories, from that though comes bullying, indirectly or whatever. It just doesn't, stop.
I think it's pretty tough, really, isn't it? When you think about our own childhoods, and we know these things still existed, but I do feel sorry, I think, for our younger generation.
Yeah.
I'm a mother of a 15-year-old teen, and I actually avoid her to use social at the minute. I think she's got a couple, but I do honestly deliberate. And I said to her seriously, I'm doing you a favour. When you get on it, you won't get off it, and it'll actually potentially be worse.
Yeah.
So it's weird, and I'm conflicted with the whole kind of keeping up with the Joneses, but at the same time trying to protect her. So I fully agree there. It's a tricky sort of thing to balance.
It is, but I do believe, when I talk about suicide prevention, I talk about life skills that need to back it up, but learning the dangers of the internet, social media, I think has to be part of it, because we're never actually going to get rid of it. But I think we need to come at it from a different angle and try and teach our young people how to use it positively. But
like toolkit type of approach, isn't
yes, it? Yeah, but it is a huge problem at the moment.
Definitely. So have any more questions from anybody, or any comments that anybody would like to make before we close? So I think one of the things I'll say is that please take a look at the report that we've put the link into. There's obviously the website as well, the 3dadswalking.uk, that's also available for us to learn a little bit more about Mike, and obviously we'll certainly continue to kind of keep an eye on your trails and your kind of walks in the future. There's also Papyrus, which is the fundraising that Mike and his colleagues do, which is that great one. And I know James you mentioned it, didn't you, James, a while ago in some of our committee meetings about Papyrus and the work that they do.
Yeah. Our Just Giving still open on if you go on our website, there's Just Giving there. But I'd just like to leave everyone with a thought. It's we meet so many bereaved parents, sadly. I meet them just about every week. But also when we walk, we hear stories of hope. We meet people who have been in crisis, in many cases have tried to take their own lives, but are now living lives they want to. It doesn't mean every day is rosy, but they want to be here, you know, and they want to tell us this as well. And those are the stories we have to concentrate on.
Yeah,
You know,
the hope, isn't it? The
that
hope.
is why we do. You know, life can be difficult, but you know, I've experienced, you know, it's good and bad. You know, but sometimes when you're younger, especially, all you see is despair in front of you. But the fact is, you get through that despair, sometimes it's a whole different ball game on the other side.
A little bit of light at that whole murky time, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Well, on behalf of the CIPR Northwest, thank you so much, Mike, for your time this evening. We've literally watched it go from daylight to dark all of a sudden in that sense. So thank you. And thank you, everyone. I hope you found it a useful and informative session this evening. I certainly have. And thank you again for everyone for coming this evening. I wish you all a lovely good evening and see you all again next year.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.